Okay, welcome to today's discussion about how to choose financial education topics that actually drive appointments. I'm joined here by Devin Kropp, who's the leader of our upcoming Liftoff Financial Educator Marketing Workshop that's starting later this month. So, Devin, I know we hear from a lot of advisors who are worried, who are looking at getting, doing some financial education in their communities, but they're always curious, what should I talk about, right? What
Mhm.
what topic should I tackle, and what are people going to be interested in? So, when advisors tend to struggle with education-based marketing, how often is, the real problem just finding the topic?
I would say actually very often that is the problem. Um, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week for anyone who caught that session too, when we were talking about people being concerned about doing educational events because they feel like they're not a natural born presenter or natural born speaker. And I actually think like a good topic can save you if you feel like you're in that boat. If your content is good and super applicable to the people who are watching it, you can kind of get away with like an average delivery. Whereas if you have a topic that's not super compelling and people aren't interested in, and then also your delivery isn't great, or even if you have a great delivery, it's just not going to land as well. I think a lot of times we run into this issue where being in this industry, like there are certain topics that are super interesting to us, but to the general consumer, like that's not what is keeping them up at night. And so we always say when you're thinking about your topic, like you want to pick that topic that is keeping your ideal client up at night because that is what is going to bring people in. And as long as you're delivering information and education during that workshop, if it's highly relevant to them and giving them some relief from whatever financial anxiety they feel around that topic, they're going to want to move along that process. So I think actually a lot of times we see just the wrong topic being used. If we have advisors who we work with who they come to us and say like, "Hey, I did this presentation and it just didn't land, like I'm not getting a lot of conversion." The first question we normally ask is what was the topic? Because a lot of times it's easy as changing your topic to having a more successful event strategy.
Okay, so what would you say? I mean, you've worked with many advisors getting started presenting. What do you think is one of the most common mistakes that advisors do make when it comes to picking the topic they're going to go with?
I would say kind of what I mentioned a little bit earlier, where it's like you pick something that's very interesting to you. So a lot of times, right, like we're in this industry and like following the market is very interesting. And so a lot of times advisors will say like do like a market update, which can be a good presentation, especially for clients, maybe like a quick webinar. But if you're going to do a whole event on it, it's really not going to draw a lot of prospects in. They can get that information everywhere. In fact, they're kind of inundated with it, right? We hear about the market all the time. You watch the news, it's everywhere. It's not necessarily solving a pain point for them. Whereas if you do something like, if they're really stressed about what their tax situation is going to look like in retirement and you come out with a presentation on that, like that is highly relevant to them and it's giving them information that they desperately want. So I think my advice is to think about the person that you want to attend this presentation. Who is your ideal client? Who do you want to replicate? What are their main concerns? And choose a topic that way. Don't necessarily pick what's interesting to you at the time because we're in this bubble as an industry where, we think these things are interesting or we think that the general consumer has all the information they need on taxes or Social Security, and that is absolutely not true. You want to think about your ideal client, what issues they come to you with, and think about what kind of presentation you can do to bring in more people like them.
Okay, so I think that's great advice. Look at your ideal client. But what kind of fears or uncertainties or big decisions do the best performing topics tend to touch on?
Right. So you're always, and when I say this too, we're talking kind of having general ideas here, right? Like you know your audience best. So if you're, going after, young professionals, you might want to not want to be focusing on retirement topics at this point in time. That's the number one thing to think about, right? Is like who is my audience? Because that's going to influence what you're going to choose. I can sit here and say, most advisors we work with are looking at the retiree, pre-retiree market, and therefore, I typically recommend topics like Social Security or taxes and retirement. But if you're going for a different, audience, you have to keep that in mind, and that's kind of your first decision point of like, what is my niche here? Who am I looking to bring in, and what are their kind of main concerns? Um, Usually you'll know that, right? Because you work with people like them and you know the questions that come in from those clients and you can replicate that. You can also, this is something you can use AI for and ask it to act like this person and what are your biggest financial concerns and think about a topic that way. Um, but again, no matter what, you want to think about what those main insecurities or anxieties are and kind of come up with a topic or use, a horse's mouth topic that is going to help answer those questions for those people because they don't necessarily care about products or strategies or like these big kind of like lofty financial ideas. They want to know, am I going to have enough money in retirement and what is my retirement going to look like? That's what they want answered. That doesn't have to be this super complex, high level, financial strategy conversation. It can be something that might seem simple to you, but could be groundbreaking to them.
Yeah, and how important is urgency when it comes to a topic? I mean, ideally, you'd be presenting about something that, the prospects need to start dealing with soon, right? And that's going to make your topic all that much more compelling, right?
Yes, yeah, I think that's certainly true. I think it's also true though that you can be talking about Social Security with people who are not yet at claiming age, right? They still have some years to go before they make a decision, but you getting to them before they're at that age can stop them from making a mistake. So, I mean, urgency is always good in marketing, right? If you can say like, hey, like you're 60 and you're going to have to make this decision soon, like come to my presentation, that's always helpful. The flip side of that is I think sometimes advisors hear urgency is important and they decide that they're going to do a presentation on like something that's happening right now, which sometimes can work, right? We get one big beautiful bill passed, there's a lot of confusion, you can do a presentation on that, and that could be something that's good. But again, we don't necessarily need to, the best presentations aren't things that are happening right now all the time, right? We get a lot of information on that. And for most people, they're not always highly concerned with the outcome of what that's going to be. However, there are these kind of core topics that affect everyone that people are interested in getting more information about. So I would say like when we talk about urgency, we're talking about like a decision point for a person, not necessarily what's in the news right now.
Okay, yeah, even if it's in the future, you could still create a sense of
Yes,
urgency by
yes,
stressing the importance to get a
right.
handle on this now before it
Yes,
becomes a crisis.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I know you mentioned Social Security as a topic. I wonder if you had any other examples of topics that do tend to perform well.
Yeah, we actually did a survey kind of on what advisors are most likely going to present this year in 2026. Some of that is based on what they did last year, some of it's just looking forward. And the results did not surprise me at all. There have been a couple topics that have consistently pulled in attendees for years, and you might say, like, oh, it's going to run out of steam. And like that just hasn't happened. Social Security is the top one and has been for years and years and years. And, the feedback we get on that is like, everyone's presenting on it like should I really be talking about this, there's too much competition, and that's just not the case. Like this is one of the biggest decisions that people make in retirement, and just because someone else is talking about it and putting on a presentation does not mean that they're getting the entire market on that. So don't be afraid of that. So number one, Social Security. The second one in the survey that came back, which I fully agree with, is like taxes and retirement specifically, what that tax picture looks like. We see from our data too that that pulls in people very, very well. As I mentioned, tax law has changed multiple times over the past 5, 6 years at this point. And while the presentation doesn't necessarily focus on those exact changes. The presentation we have here at versus Malpractice or Savvy Tax Planning, it's updated with any tax law changes that impact retirement. So it's kind of this presentation that is, all about taxes and retirement, but has some of that kind of like news updates in there too. So that I think could be compelling for people. The last one that we see, which has kind of gotten a resurgence in the past few years, is like the estate legacy planning angle. I think people are understanding the importance of having that kind of planning done. And so they're getting kind of interested in that topic as well. Now, again, if you're skewing a little bit younger and you're not in that market, college planning is always a great option. We've also seen an increase in interest in cybersecurity topics as well. So those, the top three, I would say Social Security, taxes and retirement, legacy estate planning, and then college and cybersecurity, I think for the right audience can also perform very well.
Okay, and so something about the topics you mentioned is, they focus on a specific area of financial planning.
Mhm.
Do you think, and why do you think that topics that, focus on a specific area of financial planning, like Social Security, Medicare, tax planning, etc., perform better than a more generic, financial planning primer
Mhm.
type topic that I know many advisors um, kind of gravitate to at the beginning, I
Yeah,
think.
that's a great question. I think so. I think there's this fear, and this comes through in like all kinds of marketing with advisors. There's this idea that if you focus on a specific problem or a specific audience, you're going to alienate everyone else who doesn't fit into that. And that's just simply not true. Number one, most people understand, even if you're out there giving a presentation on Social Security, that you're going to be able to help people who are not yet claiming Social Security. So number one, people kind of understand that that is true. And number two, by doing so, you're really going to capture all of those people who are in that bucket, right? Who do need help on Social Security. So you're not going to alienate people, but you are going to be able to really compete for the prospects who are in that bucket. So being specific is not a bad thing, right? I think sometimes we tend to go broad because we want to like bring in everybody, but when we go broad like that, you actually run the risk of not bringing in anyone at all because you're not necessarily answering that pain point for that group of people. Like a financial planning primer, can be great. If again, maybe you're going for an audience who, are younger, just getting into the workforce and they need that information. But if you're looking for that more high net worth pre-retiree, I would go very specific because they have these pain points, and the more specific you get, like those people are super primed now to do the next step because you've answered their questions. They know you can help them with this problem, and that to them is what is going to make them want to convert or take the next step. So I wouldn't be worried about getting specific, because again, you're going to have that built-in audience that's ready to move.
Okay, so you mentioned the fact that if you pick a topic that, is answering the questions in the attendees' minds, that's going to make, um, starting conversations and, turning them into a client easier. So, why do you think that some education events do naturally tend to lead to meetings, while maybe others, uh, you know, hit a dead end? Is it because you're not answering those questions that are in their minds with your
I think,
topic?
yeah, I think that's part of it, right? We're in this world now where like you can have education at your fingertips, right? If you have a question, you can simply go on the internet and you can get an answer. Um, just because you have an answer though doesn't mean that you feel confident in that process. And that's where I think, financial advisors can really shine with this. Is like, sure, someone could go, especially with AI now and like figure out, talk to it about claiming Social Security. That could certainly happen, but many people want that guide to walk them through the process and be able to answer their questions and give them advice. Um, and those specific topics allow you to have a built-in like conversion happening, right? So if you're presenting about Social Security, you can give all the rules and all the claiming strategies and walk everyone through that. But giving them the opportunity with a built-in follow-up strategy, which in our presentation is like come in for a personalized analysis. We're going to look at your situation. We're going to run it through the calculators, and you're going to walk away with this report. That is something that is super compelling to people rather than just going to a presentation and listening to some data that they could have read online, right? Having that natural built-in follow-up is a key part of presentation. And no matter what topic you choose, that is something that you need to think about. When we're designing our presentations here at Horse's Mouth for our members, that is something that we always think about is what is the next step? You don't want the presentation just to end with like, hey, let me take your questions and goodbye. Number one, throughout the entire presentation, you want to weave in what that follow-up is going to be. And you should always be ending with that. So say again, the example of Social Security and your follow-up strategy is that they can come in for a personal analysis. You'll run the calculator. You don't want to mention that for the first time on the last slide. That is something that should be mentioned throughout the entire presentation. Some advisors tend to get concerned that that's going to come across as like salesy and stuff, but it's not because you know what? When someone's sitting there listening to your presentation, in the back of their mind, every single person is thinking, okay, but how does this apply to me? What is my situation going to look like? They have that question. So coming out early and saying, hey, I'm going to give you the rules on this, but everyone's situation is different. And I understand that. And you're going to have the opportunity to see what your situation is. Like helps them calm down so they can actually listen to your presentation without thinking about, oh no, like what did I mess up? Like what is my situation here? So having a natural kind of follow-up conversion built into your presentation is highly, highly important. No matter what the topic is, you need to have that, and it needs to be mentioned multiple times throughout your presentation.
Okay, so when you start talking about things like doing an analysis, things like that, I can imagine some advisors thinking like, "Whoa, you know, I'm giving away, I'm giving away too much
Mhm.
for free here." What do you have to say to advisors who have that concern?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that comes up a lot. We've worked with many advisors on financial education and putting on events. And you know what? I will say, like, there are multiple ways you can do this. There are plenty of advisors, very successful advisors who have that sentiment of like, I'm not going to give this away. And so there are some, solutions there. There are advisors who will, again, will just run with the same example of the Social Security analysis. They will, if someone comes in for a meeting, they'll give them the printout and say, here you go. Again, you're giving them a lot of good information, and most of the time, that builds that relationship, and they're still want someone to work with. They don't necessarily just want to take it and go. Of course, there are some people who fit that mold, and that is part of doing business. Now, there are other advisors who will charge for the analysis, which is certainly an option. If that's something that makes you feel good about, having spent time on it yourself, like I totally understand that. And advisors do that with great success. So that is an option. Some advisors will like show them the analysis, but they only get it physically if they become a client. That's another option. Some won't do the analysis without them signing on. They'll still come in for a follow-up meeting and they'll talk about things, but they're not interested in it. So there are, various ways that you can do this. When it comes to education, though, I tend to say like we don't want to worry too much about giving all the information away, because education is what's bringing people in. It's compelling to them. Most people aren't going to go and do it on their own. But there are ways that you can balance that, right? I certainly understand not wanting to necessarily just hand over, analysis and say, all right, thanks for coming, see you later. It should be part of the entire follow-up process, and everyone has to figure out what works best for their business. And we've had advisors do different strategies, and it works. So really, it's, open to you what you want to do there. But I think having a process in place is what's important. And that means too, like your follow-up might be 2 or 3 meetings. You need to know what's happening in each one of those. It's not just giving them the report and leaving, it's what's going to happen next after that too.
Okay, so for advisors listening here, who are they're still feeling stuck choosing a topic. Do you have any advice to give them or feel advisors who are feeling that way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like if you look at the retiree market as like the people you want to go after, I would say just start with Social Security. I'll go out and just say, do that. We know that it works. If that's not your audience, then I would think about your top like 3 to 5 clients and think about the past few conversations you've had with them. What are the things that they're concerned about? What are they bringing up? What's the commonality there? And once you figure that out, think about what kind of educational topic you can build around that. Because ideally, you want to replicate those top clients, right? You want all of your clients to be like those 3 to 5 people who are just great and they're your cheerleaders and they, fill out every form you ask them to. How can you replicate them is by educating people on the topics keeping them up at night. So I would say, if you don't want to go with the tried and true or that's not your market, that's where I would start. But if you're like in the retiree space, I would just put a Social Security workshop on the calendar and get yourself ready to go.
And of course, the Liftoff Financial Educator Marketing Workshop does spend some time helping advisors
Yeah, we
pick and
spent,
structure their
yes.
topic. Yeah.
Our first session is we talk a lot about topics. We actually go through, I was reviewing the slides yesterday. We go through like 12 different topics. We talk about the pros and cons of each. We talk about, who is interested in those topics. We talk about kind of that natural follow-up that I was talking about. So we spend a lot of time on topic selection, and we purposefully do that in the first session because your entire strategy is going to be built around this. Like we kind of started when we opened this conversation, your presentation can fail simply because you chose the wrong topic. And so if you're going to build an entire strategy around this, the right topic is the core of that. And so we want to make sure that we have, good topics selected for each advisor that goes through the program. Like everybody's slightly different. So we work with, advisors in the program to figure out what topics make the most sense for them. In fact, we had someone who went through this program last time we did it. And this advisor wanted to target a younger audience, first-time home buyers, in fact. And we didn't really have anything within our library that, she could use for that. So during the program, we worked with her to create a first-time homebuyer presentation, which is now available for our master members. So when I say like we want to work with you on this, like we really want to work with you on this. So if there's something that, doesn't exist that we think is compelling and can help people, like, we're all for finding the topic that really works for each advisor that goes through the program to the point where like developing, a new presentation can occur. So this is really an interactive program. Like we're not just going to sit here and, I'm not going to just read from slides. Here are the topics that you can pick. We really want to work with you on. That's why we have the weekly coaching office hours that go along with it. That's your opportunity or attendees' opportunity to come and say, hey, like, I need to talk through this with someone. Like, what topics make sense? Because we want to make sure that you're really making a plan that works for you and your business. And that's not going to look the same for every single person that goes through the program.
Yeah. And some of the best learning moments do come in those office hours where
Absolutely.
members are
That's
just,
where this home
yeah.
buyer presentation came from. And now it's, available to many people. And, we can do that again. So that there is so much value that comes from these office hours where we can just, talk. Not only can you get advice from, us at Horse's Mouth, but the advisors in the program talk to each other, and there's so much learning coming from each other that it's great. And we learn from the attendees too, right? We know we get a finger on the pulse of, what advisors are looking for from an education standpoint, what they want to talk to clients and prospects about. So it's really just a great part of the program. And those, are weekly throughout the program, and then we meet monthly for 6 months following it. So we're not, we really want to see you through the process. We want to get you to a point where you're presenting, you're following up, and any questions that happen during that process, we're there to help, right? Because we know that you're not necessarily going to do your first presentation during the program. It might be a month later. We want to make sure that, you have an opportunity to come back and say, here's what worked, here's what I need to work on. Can you help me troubleshoot that? And that's the point of that kind of 6 month follow-up as well.
Yeah. And okay. And so the workshop starts later this month, right?
Yep, January 29th is our first session. We meet weekly for 2 hours for 4 weeks. And then again, we have that 1 hour office hour during the week as well. So it's 3 hours a week for you to come and learn and talk. And you leave with a full marketing plan for the year. So you can just kind of get started with it. By the middle of February, you'll be done and ready to go.
Okay, and if you want to find out more information or sign up, you can go to horsesmouth.com/liftoff. It's on screen, and then it's also in the description wherever you're watching this. That's going to do it. Devin, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much. Hope to see everyone soon.